trying to do the best I could to dispel the belief in the GOAT.
I dreamt about having a parade in Michigan Avenue.
It's not interference, but if the fan gets out of the way of it, Moises gets a phenomenally important out.
My glove was right there, and I had the ball.
Moises 100% would have caught the ball.
They are stunned.
I'm sick and tired of that question. I swear, man.
Wow, that just happened.
And then bad things happen.
And bobbled by Gonzalez, and everybody's safe.
Ooh, man. This has the makings of not good news for Cubs fans.
I didn't even watch the news that night. I didn't come home and watch any of it because I knew what it was going to be.
To be a Cub, you have to be strong mentally and physically.
It was probably the most difficult time in my life.
5 outs, how the 2003 Cubs captivated Chicago. Presented by Lexus. Premieres tomorrow at 9.
We continue Sports Talk Live. I'm David Kaplan. Everything brought to you by Land Rover. Joining me on the panel, esteemed baseball expert, voice of the White Sox with Hawk. He is Steve Stone. And how about the co-producer of 5 Outs, Ryan McGuffey, senior producer of original content here at Comcast Sportsnet. Guff, we've got 5 Outs airing Tuesday night. Tonight there'll be a big premiere with a lot of advertisers and people from the advertising world. What went into putting 5 Outs together?
I think it just started as an idea. You know, the 10 years of an anniversary, it makes it easy to go, okay, what happened 10 years? Oh, 2003. And then you just kind of start thinking about, I think it starts with that whole 8th inning and then kind of backtracks from there, and you start looking at some of the pieces involved. I mean, this was probably right around when the time baseball season started about mid-April, I think, is when I really started kind of kicking the tires on, well, what do we have here? And then the idea became, a little bit larger scale once we started talking to Kevin Cross and you, and then it kind of took off from there with some of the interviews we got. But the one thing I wanted to concentrate on specifically was not making it about Steve Bartman, because, so much has been made of the guy for 10 years. I think we've seen other documentaries and stuff like that kind of dive into specifically about that guy, that play, that moment, and kind of things that followed. And yeah, sure, it's a huge moment, and you have to talk about it, but there are other things around it, the Alex Gonzalez boot and some things that followed, Game 7, for instance, that you have to get into. But really, when you look at it, 2003, that team was so likable. There were a lot of guys on that team just that you could see you had a Starbucks on the corner, and you'd run into an Eric Karros or Mark Grudzielanek or whatever, and they were just a likable team. And Chicago was kind of, thirsting for some team to kind of, hop onto, because 1998, that was the last title at that point with the Bulls. And then, the White Sox, a lot of people forget that the White Sox were right there all the way to September in first place. But that's kind of, how it came about.
Steve, you called the entire season on TV. You called the playoffs on radio when Ron Santo unfortunately got sick. What do you remember about the 03 team?
Just remember a team that I thought was good enough to win it all. The pitching staff was outstanding. You had Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor, top of their games. You had Zambrano throwing the ball exceptionally well. I remember that they hit a lot of home runs. I remember they played pretty solid defense. Ironically, I remember that Alex Gonzalez made 10 errors all year, a very dependable shortstop. I thought it was a team that had as good a chance as any team that I had seen, and I got there in 1983, as good a chance as any team to get there. Not only to get to the World Series finally for the first time since 1945, but actually win the World Series and still contend. Had they gotten there with that pitching staff, they would have had an exceptional chance to do that, but we all know how it worked out.
I think back to that season, and at the start of the year, no one expected the Cubs to be that good. Dusty's in his first year. They won 67 games the year before. Nobody thought this team's going to be that good, and they hung around, and all of a sudden, they make the trade for Ramirez and Lofton, and then that's when people started to think this team could do something special.
I think Kenny Lofton was the one real big difference, because the one thing the team was lacking was a leadoff hitter. A guy who was a proven winner, who could get on base, who could distract the opposing pitcher if he did get on base. And Lofton, whether you like them or not, was a real good player. And I think he gave the Cubs something that I think they've needed for a long time after that, which is a bona fide leadoff hitter who could actually get on base, hit around 300, maybe with an on-base percentage in the neighborhood of 380. And when he got on base, he would disrupt the pitcher. Just take a little bit of the concentration away from that pitcher. Lofton did that, and of course Ramirez turned out to be one of the great third basemen around, probably the guy that if you're going to look for that bridge from Santo to whomever, Ramirez was that guy.
All right, so you sit down and you make a list. I remember you in the office making a list of who do we have to make this thing a reality. Dusty, Pryor, Wood, Moises. I mean, there was this lengthy list.
You just named those are kind of like the pillars. All right, who are the guys we think we need to
Steve Bartman was...
Well, yeah, I mean, Bartman, he was kind of like, you know...
Pie in the sky.
Sure, the pie in the sky, and then you kind of worked your way down from there. But I think talking about the team, you know, the players, those are you just named the kind of the pillars that we recognize. I'm thinking, all right, if we get 3 of them, we got something here. Well, then, you know, we got 3 of them, and then we got 4 of them, and then all of a sudden it was more than that. Then the Marlins guys, we start branching out a little bit and going, okay, well, Derek Lee's accessible. Juan Pierre still plays in the league.
Todd Hollingsworth
here. Ozzy's here in Chicago. A lot of people forget that he was the third base coach of that team.
Cabrera comes through town.
Miguel Cabrera comes through town, the best hitter in baseball. Boom, no problem. He sits down. So that it just became like this, like I said, like a pie in the sky list. You start writing down names, and then it just, you know, it's like 6 degrees of separation. Really, it really was, because it was like he's connected to him, and he's connected this way, and there's 3 more guys here. And I mean, like Stoney was obvious. I mean, there was no doubt about that. But I think piggybacking off of what you just said, Steve, you know, a lot of people, the Kenny Lofton trade was a huge moment that season. But a lot of people forget that Corey Patterson, and I know he had some tough years here, but he had an all-star caliber first half of that year. And had he not gone down with a season-ending knee injury, Kenny Lofton may not ever be a Chicago Cub. Now, he might be, but I think that was something that made Jim Hendry have to go out and get somebody like Kenny Lofton. But those are the stories that we tell. This is not just about the NLCS. It's about going all the way back to the moment Dusty was hired. And it's how this team was put together and how this team kind of on the fly was built to be a World Series caliber team.
When you think back to the start of the year, Dusty coming in, he replaces, I think it was Don Baylor got fired, and then Bruce Kim was the interim.
Yes.
Then Dusty comes in here. What do you remember about the start of the Dusty regime? Because you were integral in talking to him before he took the job.
I remember talking to him when he was at a game at Notre Dame and finding out about his interest in coming to him, and actually going to Jim Hendry afterward. And Hendry says, he said to me in these exact words, he says, "What do you think our chances are of getting Dusty?" I said, 95% unless you screw it up. And so they got Dusty because Dusty wanted to come here, because it was here or Seattle, I believe, and Seattle might have taken away their interest at one point. So this was a good fit for Dusty at the time. And he came here with the high hopes that every manager comes here with, you know, if I can do it, if I'm the guy, I will live forever in the annals of Chicago sports history, and maybe sports history in the United States, or who knows, beyond that, wherever Cub fans reside at this point. But I just remember there was kind of a new hope here, because Dusty came with a great reputation from San Francisco. He had gotten very close with the San Francisco Giants. I mean, agonizingly close. And that, of course, has been the trademark of Dusty's career. He gets agonizingly close, and then Lucy takes away the football. That's what happened here. But at that point, everybody was full of hope. They thought Dusty would be the guy. He brought in his coaching staff. There was a new feeling, and there was a lot of positive aspects to that year. And you're right about the Corey Patterson situation, because I remember him hitting that bag at first base, and I still remember when he went down thinking, wow, you know, this is going to probably be season-ending for him. And this was a guy they took with the 3rd pick in the country. We were finally seeing the guy that everybody thought he was going to be as a 3rd pick in the country. And by the way, we never saw that guy again.
Interesting to see how one move begets another move, begets another move, and how it all came together. If you look at September that year, They go 19-8. Prior to August, I don't think anybody believed that team was going to make a run like they did. They got hot, they made the trade, and then here comes a 5-game series against Tony La Russa and the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Chicago Cubs take 4 of them. And I remember Dusty barking at La Russa. They're arguing, the bench is empty, everybody's, wow, the Cubs aren't being pushed around, things are different. And then they win 4 of the 5.
I remember when that series was over, sitting back in my chair, because if you remember that series, each and every game was spectacular. Each and every game was a nail-biter. Each and every game went to almost the last play of the game. And I remember sitting back and looking at Chip Carey. He looked over at me, and we just sat back and took a huge breath, and both said almost simultaneously, that is the single greatest in-season series that we had ever seen. And to be part of it, and to see the kind of battling that the Chicago Cubs went through, and to beat a team that everybody felt was better than the Cubs. The Cardinals were the odds-on choice to win it that year, as they usually are. And that series was one of the most entertaining, one of the most dramatic, one of the most exhausting, one of the most exhilarating series that I had ever been associated with in season.
And the players told us, I mean, they couldn't wait to talk about that series, the guys who took part in that. And there's no doubt that it provided the spark that they needed, because they went 14-4, I believe, in the first 18 games in September. And they kind of never looked back, and St. Louis kind of sputtered a little bit, and it became the Houston and Chicago 2-horse race down the stretch there.
Sammy told us, he said when Dusty was yelling at Tony La Russa and we weren't getting pushed around, we went, wow, our manager has our back and the Cubs are for real. It was that moment.
Well, that series, if you would go back and just kind of measure each game on the drama scale, each one progressively got higher and higher and higher, and finally when the series was done, it was exhausting. It was exhausting for the 2 guys calling it. I can only imagine what it was like for the guys who were playing in it.
All right, so Ryan and I are at the Kerry Wood Wiffle Diffle charity tournament, and we decide we're going to get Derek Lee while we're there. And he and I every day go get a cup of coffee. Every day we walk to Dunkin' Donuts and we go, well, how are we going to get a loo? There's no way they're going to let us fly to the Dominican to get a loo. We're walking onto the field. There's Derek Lee. And I see him and he says, yeah, let me talk to my family for a second. I'll come down and do whatever you guys need. Ryan hits me in the shoulder. He's like, look, there he is. We look at the doorway on Sheffield, and checking in to be a celebrity in the wiffle ball is Moises. I walk up to him. He agrees to talk to us. He sits down, and he said, I'm so tired of these questions. But he does it, and then won't speak to anyone the rest of the day.
And the thing about Moises of that day, too, like, he sat down and he knew it. He knew exactly what you were going to ask him. And before you could even ask him the question, he was already talking about it.
Right.
So it's, I mean.
He goes, how much time you need? I said, Dusty gave us 20. He goes, you got 2. And he went about 15.
He went like 10 to 12, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I think what stood out to me, you know, now about the whole process of getting these interviews and doing this documentary is that was a very memorable season, not just for Chicago and fans, and not because of the way it ended, but that was a fun season in Chicago, period. That team was fun. And I talked about the likability factor, but there was a lot to like about that team. And obviously, 04, that whole team was better, and they kind of...
And they weren't well-liked.
No. And they weren't, and a lot of people
surprising.
When they talked, I mean, we've talked, and Steve, I asked you this, you know, why was that team so lovable? And when you had a team like 07 and 08 that was built a lot differently than the 2003 Cubs.
And were arguably better teams.
They were better. I mean, they won 97 games in 2008, but the city didn't embrace that team like they did 2003. Why is that?
That's a difficult question to ask, but I'll take you back to baseball of 2003 because we have a tendency to be kind of Chicago-centric when we talk about that 2003 season. But if you do remember, the Boston Red Sox were in the exact same position as the Chicago Cubs. A 3-run lead, 5 outs to go, with their ace on the mound, Pedro Martinez. And that World Series, the 2003 Chicago Cubs the 2003 Boston Red Sox, the curse of the Bambino, the GOAT curse, would have finally been put to bed because someone would have had to win that World Series. And both teams were agonizingly close. And the amazing part about that year is neither team made it. Do you know the odds of both teams not making it, getting as close as they were, with seeming no trouble at all, and two guys on the mound that have had spectacular seasons? But that's exactly what happened. So why were they lovable in 2003? I think because it was a surprise. I think because these players who came from a lot of different places and came together started to get the city believing that they could actually do it. And because as they were going down the path, as Kerry Wood threw Game 5 in Atlanta, and nobody believed that he could beat the Braves in Atlanta, and when he beat the Braves in Atlanta, all of a sudden this city that is as cynical as any city going,
it bought in.
It started to buy into it. And all of a sudden, these players became, as will happen in Chicago, bigger than life. Well, after the disappointment of 2003, when everybody expected them in 2004 to win it, and then there were a lot of distraction that 2004 season, and there was a lot of things coming from the players outwardly instead of concentrating on the field, I think that's when the fans decided that maybe these guys weren't quite as likable as we thought they might have been. Some of the guys remained likable. I mean, look, Derek Lee came over, and Derek Lee was a very popular player and still is a very popular player to this point. And there are some guys who are extremely popular from that team, but as a group, 2004 was not a likable bunch of guys.
All right, last one for you before we wrap this up. The Bartman play. We've interviewed everybody about it. You are the only one on this panel that called it. I did the post game. You called the play. What do you remember, and what do you take away from all the interviews we did about it?
One of the things that I probably couldn't say at the time was that never having been in Moises Alou's home, I don't know what his trophy case or his mantle looks like, but I do believe that there are no gold gloves there. So when Moises tells you that
that's 100%.
That he would have made that catch, I saw him boot routine catches much easier than that. I saw him make some good catches, obviously, but nobody, especially later in his career, nobody would have rated him a top-of-the-line left fielder, or in many instances, nobody would have rated him an adequate left fielder. He was a substandard left fielder. Would he have made the catch? Nobody really knows. At that point, I didn't think it was fan interference because, I mean, and then we had a chance to look at it. And don't forget, I was doing radio at the time. And so we probably didn't get near as many angles because I don't think we had as many televisions in the radio booth. We didn't get near as many angles as the television people did because it was, you know, on the network. And it's really hard to tell. It just looked to me like when a player goes into the stands, leans over that invisible rail, if a fan does not lean over into the field of play where it can be fan interference, then it's player, go get it. If you don't get it, it's too bad. Well, he didn't get it.
What I take away is, thankfully, none of these guys sit there and point to that play and say, that guy, you know, it spiraled because of that. And I'm glad, including Moises, even though he still was adamant that he would catch that ball today.
Sure.
But they all feel horrendous for a guy who's never come in, you know, Steve Bartman still has not been in the public eye, still not done an interview. But they all, depending on who you talk to, and you'll see it in the documentary, some guys point to the reaction of Moises as being the reason why it all kind of fell apart from there, because the concentration level of that game with 5 outs to go was ratcheted up as far as it could be. They were all playing like this. And the moment Moises reacted and continued to react and continued to look back in the stands and continued to point his finger to Steve Bartman, players started to feel this.
And that's what Sammy told us. He said as soon as Moises reacted the way he did, that's when we lost our focus.
My feeling has been, and you know this because we've talked about it and we talked about it on the special, is that, yes, Moises overreacted for a number of different reasons. We won't go into many of them. That being said, someone should have gone to Mark Prior. And even though Mark Prior says that he didn't need anybody to come to the mound, he was a first-year player, first-year pitcher. He was in the postseason for the first time. Everything that happened to him that year was for the first time because he was a first-year pitcher. The fact that he doesn't recognize that somebody needed to go to the mound, Dusty Baker or Larry Rothschild had to go to the mound and say, son,
relax.
Forget about that. Let's just relax. We got 5 outs to go. I got a bullpen full of guys that can come get you. Give me the best you can. And what Mark Pryor says was, I made a couple of bad pitches. Why did a guy who made no bad pitches to that point suddenly make some bad pitches? I think his lack of understanding of what has to happen at that point is clearly visible by the fact that to this day he doesn't think he needed a trip to the mound. I'm 6 decades in professional baseball. I did take a no-hitter into the 8th inning. I remember getting knocked out in that 8th inning after a guy got a hit. When dramatic things happen in a ball game late, whether you're a young pitcher or a little bit older pitcher, you need an authority figure to come to the mound and put things back in perspective for you. And I believe it was a mistake on the part of both Dusty Baker and Larry Rothschild not visiting Mark Pryor that led to all of this.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Captain. Thank you to Sarah Lauk, who put
Sarah Lauk is the absolute star of our station. She is the head of original content, on-air production here, and she is off the charts the best. So thank you again to Sarah Lauk and to all of our bosses here for allowing 5 outs to become a reality. You will get it at 9 o'clock tomorrow night, Tuesday night, 9 o'clock. You've got to watch it. 90 minutes of some of the most compelling TV you will ever see.